Over to you, Nigel. Thank you very much.
Yes, so I'm here today to talk about cybersecurity. This is quite an interesting subject area. I think most people are aware of cybersecurity, and in their organisations they'll be pressured, I guess, to respond to the prevailing threats. Depending on the size of your organisation, you've either got big IT teams or you've got small IT teams. So I'm keeping this quite a high level. When we go into questions later, I can go into a bit more detail. The first slide here, I'm showing us someone checking a card to see it's locked or unlocked, and really, from my perspective, cybersecurity is just like any security. You know, if you leave your car door unlocked and your valuables on display, somebody will break in and nick the stuff. And so, from our perspective, I think in the cyber world or the IT world, it's very similar. You know, if you leave your doors open and unlocked, if you leave your stuff on display, people will take it. They're not targeting you specifically. A lot of the time they're just targeting you because they found that you weren't secure. And that's something I think we have to just keep in mind all the time. So I guess the big question is, how best can we design and operate our infrastructures to protect against this risk? And I think there is no silver bullet. Sally previously said that about business cases, and I think we have to particularly just adopt an ethos around how we do things. We have to make the business case, and as with all investment in technology, you have to look at the risks, the organisational risks that you run. You know, banks have a different risk profile to some of our organisations, and they invest accordingly. And I guess one thing I would say is I do actually think IT departments are all the same. I've worked in many sectors now, or several sectors now, and fundamentally you have the same makeup and the same challenges. You know, you have a help desk, you have network infrastructures, you have application infrastructures. You either have big teams who will do this, or a single person. There's a typical set of systems you have to support and maintain, be they websites, they could be transactional websites, informational websites, EPOS systems, ticketing systems, and then I've sort of said applications, but it's Microsoft Office and the desktop, Windows, mobile phones even, and Wi-Fi, and they all have vulnerabilities in them, be they personnel, be they the technology, and it's something that we have to be aware of. If you run an IT function, if you have technology in your organisation, there are vulnerabilities you have to be aware of, and you just can't really ignore that. And it has cybercrime, again, it's very high profile nowadays, but it has been around for a long time. It's pretty much since PCs were born or arrived, and I think it's all understand by sort of, as I said earlier, by generic hacking, people trying to hack into your systems and trying to steal something or ruin your business through that denial of service tech, or trying to lift data or defraud you or take money from you. And if you look back in time, in my time, or some, depending how many people have been in the sector for a long time, there were, the old days, there was the worm, the code red, the Ninja virus. Now, these were destructive viruses that came into your organisation and infected every PC that was vulnerable. It even infected the backups. So when you went to backups, you restored from backups and infected the PCs again. So these have been around for a long time. So it's just an evolving threat. And as organisations, I think we just have to acknowledge it's just going to keep going. You can't just fix it now and ignore it for the future. You just sort of evolve with the threat. I mentioned here phishing and spear phishing. This is particularly prevalent now, where you're getting emails purporting to be from someone in your organisation asking someone else to do something, and so we just have to deal with these and make sure the organisation are aware. And this one here just shows it can be the simplest of email. ISPs now are blocking a lot of these, but it is the simplest of email that you can respond to very innocently. In responding to that email, as most of you know, that email could either take you to a spoof website, you could download a payload. Ransomware is quite prevalent at the moment, or was quite prevalent, or it could install a keylogger or something like that. So it's a more targeted way of trying to get information out of your organisation. And what's also at risk is obviously your organisation's reputation. And I think this next slide I've got is about, I don't even remember, most people remember sort of the Carphone Warehouse or the TalkTalk hacks, and it was quite interesting. Dido Harding, who's a CEO, was in front of a parliamentary committee and taking away the niceties of it. The first question from the committee was, can I ask who is responsible for security? Her response could only be she was. And this is an executive level challenge, and I think the way we're obliged. I'm not sure that everyone's from here, but it's very important to make this an executive issue. It's not it's not a technology issue. It's a corporate risk that has to be dealt with by the chief executive, and responsibility handed down. And going on about the fact it just keep going, the IT sector, I always say, is quite funny in that we create a new technical solution, it has a vulnerability in it, gets exploited, we then spend our time fixing it, only for the next new innovation to come along which has got a vulnerability in it. So we just always have to be aware whenever something new comes along, be it mobile phones, be it some new system, be it some new audio guide or something like that, almost certainly there will be some vulnerability in it that you need to take a consideration on. Should you patch it or not patch it? What's the risk? And so there are standards around that we have to comply with, or can comply with, and PCI is one of them. DSS, most of you probably aware, I don't know how many of you handle credit card or payment card information, lots of nods. So the payment card industry data security standard is a standard that helps you, or is mandated, you have to do to secure your payment card details that you take. And depending on the size and nature of your organisation, it can be quite tricky to get compliant. It depends on the systems you use and how they work. Version 2 is the old standard, which focused a lot on the actual data you held and the business processes and technology processes around that information, and it covered paper-based forms as well as the IT systems. And generally our approach, and my approach has always been to just try and move those out of scope. So if trying to arrange when you're designing a website, redesigning a website, it was a transactional one, so just make sure that you hand over to a payment card, sort of an organisation that handles payments for you, rather than try and handle it yourself and take the data internally. With forms, paper forms, the effort you have to do to try and maintain a paper form and redact out the credit card details and things, there's a lot of effort. So just look at what you're doing and try and remove all of those touch points where you actually end up holding the data. A good solution was what they call P2PE compliant devices, which is where it's a device that directly goes out to the payment provider in an encrypted tunnel, and so it takes all your networks out of scope. PCI version 3 though now says you have to make sure that device isn't tampered with, so somehow now if you've got a row of these devices or some spares on a shelf, you have to now make sure you can show that they're not being tampered with, and that they are the devices that you originally procured. And so it will always be a moving target as the threat moves, and so we're buying forensics bags to keep our devices in, so that when they're stored we know if they've been opened, and so it's just, you just have to work it out. The new standard come along, there'll be a PCI 3 point something or the next, or 4. But for us and previously, making sure that you just trying to, when you design your systems, taking that card data out of your systems is generally is the easiest way of dealing with these things. I don't know if everyone here is PCI compliant. I don't know few nods, and so it is quite a challenge. I know there's a number of organisations still aren't, some quite big ones. I think over the last year there's still some quite big organisations were compliant. So yes, as I said, it's better to remove the payment card data from the scope of the network, and it does apply to both on-site transactions, so from your ticketing kiosks, because you've got those, or some kind of EPOS system, as well as your websites. And the interesting thing with PCI is it does focus specifically on payment card details, and so there was a lot of effort a few years ago to secure the payment card details, but actually we all have other data anyway, customer data covered under the Data Protection Act, even financial systems, the phishing attacks and things like that, keyboard loggers trying to access your systems that take bank payments or make bank payments. So actually PCI is almost too targeted in some respects. So you become PCI accredited, but actually you may still have a whole load of other business processes that need looking at. And the government have acknowledged this, and so they've come up with Cyber Essentials, which is probably most of you probably aware of. And this is It's actually a really useful checklist, I have to say, and in fact this presentation could be very easy. I could just give you a copy of the very public slide they do around it, which I'm going to show you in the next slide. But it's good in that if you follow these best practice guidelines, you will actually, it is a route to being as secure as you probably can be, and you can get accredited against Cyber Essentials if you want to go. I think Cyber Essentials Plus. And it looks something like this, and so they've got their top 10 steps, and it looks at education and educating the user awareness. This is readily available on the internet, I have to say, so this isn't my own slide, this is a CESG slide. Home and mobile working, looking at how you deal with home and mobile working, secure configuration of your infrastructure, removable media, USB sticks. I mean, you can read this, managing user privileges, that's looking after the desktop. And all of these, you can, if you focus or at least understand these areas, it's a good way. And the government is saying to many organisations now, and I think some areas some organisations are mandating it, and some it's a very good framework to progress on. Yes, it can be difficult to become fully compliant with Cyber Essentials, but it's a good start. It's a good target to have for in each of those areas. And as I said, Cyber Essentials Plus isn't you can go for, but that's where an external company would come and audit you against the Cyber Essentials framework. So depending on your organisation, you might choose to go for that or not. And so that moves that sort of. I could finish now on Cyber Essentials because that's a very good sort of target. What I'm going to do now is cover what I call kind of areas of consideration, and so this is using my own language on things we could look at in our IT infrastructures to move us along reducing sort of our exposure to the cyber threat. So it's kind of a ready reckoner in a way, but I would say that I'm not a security expert. I'm an IT professional. I've been doing IT for a long time, but I always work with security experts, and I think the critical aspect for me is partnering with an organisation that's right for you, and let them help and advise you on the best way forward, depending on how your organisation is and what the threats you face. If you're really small, just make sure someone in your organisation is following the security landscape and going to the right events and things like that. You know, there's somebody you have to be able to either partner with somebody or have somebody that you can say, we're going to follow the security landscape, we're going to follow the threats, we're going to go to the right shows and come back with the initiatives, the products you can buy and the ideas to help reduce the exposures you have. I would say areas you have to consider, I would use the word securing your perimeter. So ensure your network is secured. This is around firewalls, depending on how big your organisation is. If you have connections out to the internet, if you have broadband links, you have to be aware and make sure that they're secured. Now, if you buy a home broadband, you get a BT router that's got a firewall in it, so that's a relatively secured network. Again, as an organisation, depending on how you take your internet provisions, it's something you have to consider. Secure your email system. Email is where a huge number, I mean for us the majority of viruses or attacks come in through email. So you have to have some sort of email filtering in place. Subscribe to an external company who filter your email for you. Excellent protection from the majority of email-bound virus attacks or payloads that come in. All our web browsing goes through a filtering organisation as well. So again, any links that take us to compromised websites get blocked as well. And so just understanding that area of protection is really key. The other one I'd say is secure the desktop. So the desktop PC or your laptop. Make sure it's got antivirus on it. Make sure the antivirus auto updates. We see quite a lot, and I mean the sector sees quite a lot of viruses that are very new. I mean, the zero-day virus is a virus that was someone put together this morning and it gets sent out within an hour before your antivirus gets updated. We see, and I've seen in the past examples where a virus gets stopped by our generic scanning, and then our antivirus at the desktop gets updated within a couple of hours. So, you do have to update your antivirus regularly if you've got it, and it's a critical part of securing your systems. Secure your Wi-Fi. I think I think there was a lot of focus on Wi-Fi security a few years ago about how it could be encrypted, how the encryption could get broken. I think the risk we see now is people just plugging Wi-Fi into their network to give them some more coverage without understanding what that's actually doing to the network and how that's extending it. So again, it's depending on the size of your organisation, it's either a risk or it isn't. But again, you just have to make sure that people are aware that you can't just set a Wi-Fi network up without thinking about how you're going to secure that and how you're going to stop everyone else from accessing your networks. Next one is desktop standard build. So have a lockdown desktop. Don't let people install as many apps as they want. Keep it closed. Keep a fixed set of applications. Don't give everybody admin rights. Again, depending on the size of the organisation, this is either makes lots of sense or it doesn't. There's always a pressure for admin people saying, I want to install this app and this app or this program, but actually from a security perspective you don't want that, because when a virus goes live, if they've got admin rights, it goes live with admin rights. From a licensing perspective, you don't really want people just installing software because you want to stay on top of the licensing. So there's a lot of benefits of doing that. Make sure the build is centrally managed. That's easy. You get a new PC and you make sure you've got the same build. That way you know all your entire landscape. If there was a virus went live, you know what your exposure is. If you've got a multitude of build PCs bought from different suppliers, it just makes it quite difficult to stay on top of. And the final one I'd say on this one is be very aware of the difference between what we call an off-network PC and an on-network PC. If you've secured your network using with the firewalls and things, that PC is relatively clean. If you take it to Starbucks and just log on to and use it on the Wi-Fi there to surf the internet, that PC could become compromised. You then take it back to your organisation and plug it in. It's now potentially a risk to your organisation's network. Again, depending on how your network's configured. But again, everywhere I've ever worked, we're always very clear what is a dirty PC and what is a clean PC from that perspective. Routine patching of servers and desktops. This is a key one of Cyber Essentials and probably the most difficult to achieve. It's getting better these days, but sometimes putting patches on and keeping your servers updated can actually impact how applications run on them. So you have to have a regime of testing. You have to test all your applications before you do that. The patching, we have up to 100 applications that we have to test if we were, if we're going to do this routinely. So it's just a challenge, but it's good practice. The desktop PCs, again, the auto update on them happens if you've configured it and if your network allows it. It's good practice to allow it to happen, but it can break some of your sort of less popular apps that you have. But you have to take a view on it. Critically, you have to remember your apps as well as your operating system. So Adobe Flash Player, I think, has had a few vulnerabilities in it recently. And so it's again being aware of what you're running and then being able to update it and patch it. USB sticks, interesting one. Use them or don't use them. If I had my way, I'd block them all. But today I came with my presentation on USB stick, and so you can't block them all. So you have to manage the risks on that, and you just have to make a decision. Do you allow USB sticks or not? Do you encrypt them? Do you not encrypt them? And again, it's about usability, because if you do block USB sticks, and people still need to use them, they'll find another way, and they'll email the document out to themselves. And you just, so I think you just have to take a pragmatic approach on that one. Encrypted USB sticks, an interesting one. I don't know if anyone's aware of these, but if you are going to allow USB sticks, the worst thing that could happen is the CEO's presentation to the trustees asking for funding for something gets dropped and found and someone else picks it up. It's not a security breach, it's not a data breach, but actually it's quite embarrassing. So encrypted USB sticks are actually quite a nice way of giving someone like CEO or key staff a device they can actually use. You type a PIN number in and it works like a USB stick. The great thing about these is it doesn't need any client software. So it will work on an Apple, it will work on a Windows PC, it will work in a video player or a TV, because the encryption is actually device-based rather than needing any kind of operating system support. And another really important area is really just an awareness program. again, wherever I've worked, we always have an intranet or some form of intranet. There's some kind of IS blog, security blog running, making people aware of the threats, what's happened recently, what hasn't happened, and making people aware about payments. I mean, recently there's a lot of emails coming in purporting to come from CEOs saying, can you please authorise payments? Some of these are just trying to work out how the organisation's structured. Some of them are clever, some of them aren't clever. But making people aware that an email these days doesn't necessarily come from who it says it was. And just looking at business processes around how you make payments. Who's able to make a payment, who can transfer money. Can you have it that you say we don't do approvals by email point blank, and that there has to be a phone call to support it? You can do some good non-IT solutions to protecting against these. But it is just we see some of it coming in, and I've always have. Some of it's quite clever. Some of it is a call from somebody purporting to be from an organisation. I get them from an IT perspective, saying they're from IBM, or saying, then they say, can you tell me what firewalls you use, or just as well, why would I tell you? I don't know who you are. So, but you do get it quite a lot. So, and then the Data Protection Act obviously is another one, and probably everyone here has some obligations under the Data Protection Act. So again, it's about assessing what you should be holding, what data you should be holding, and generally making sure that you only hold the data you need to. So then, if you did have a breach, you'll be in trouble for having the breach, but not for holding the data that you shouldn't have had anyway. And I think that's one of the challenges with organisations is making sure you're compliant, so that if there was a breach, you're in trouble for the breach, but not for holding the data that you shouldn't have had in the first place. So, and then incident response. So having a way of responding to incidents and a documented sort of procedure to dealing with small and large incidences. Having a pre-agreed plan of actions, which is agreed by the CEO. Really, you have to treat these things depending on the size of a breach or the size of an incident. If a virus goes live and all your PCs become infected, or ransomware, the organisation operation is at risk. And so these are quite big issues, and so they should be treated like a major incident and documented and planned for as such. I don't mention it, but also I've always run ideas, a mechanism of what we call a near miss. So if you do have an incident where a virus is blocked, or a phishing exercise happens, but you find out about it, we log them and review them, and then this is always a good way of sort of learning from what's happened or nearly happened, readying yourselves for the next occurrence. And you might tweak your systems a bit. It might help for a business case for more investment in a certain area of technology. If you can say, well, 10,000 viruses were blocked last year, or 100 got through our perimeter network but were blocked by our desktop. It's a good way of tracking that. And then the next few slides are just a day in the life. So this is just a happy day scenario, I call this. And I'll just put it here because I think some of you probably see these every day, some of you might not. But this is a good day scenario. So the user inserts a USB stick with a virus on it. Happens all the time, I have to say. It won't be mine because mine's a new one. So you've got your antivirus on that laptop. It's centrally managed, so your help desk get an alert that says that a USB stick's been inserted with a virus on it. And simply all that happens, the help desk contact the user because it's a managed environment. You know the user because you know the laptop number or the desktop number. They contact the user and ask if they've seen the alert. The user confirms it's happened when they inserted the USB stick. The help desk quarantine the USB stick and explain the risks, and we set an instance set up. And if you've got all your systems right, that's just what happens. It is actually, it's as easy as that. I've seen situations where that USB stick then gets reinserted about 6 times along the next few days because the person keeps taking it home or reformatting it, but it turns out what they're doing is taking it home and the PC at home's compromised, and then bring it back to work. And so, but these things, if it's all in place and all centrally managed and all up to date, this is the normal, this is the happy day scenario that happens a lot. The unhappy day scenario I'm not going to go into because we don't have them much, but I think I'll just use this. It can all work, and it all works well when you invest in it. And I guess this is kind of the final slide. Really, is this is always going to be here, and so this is about evolving capability, evolving your infrastructures. Having a solid incident plan, incident response plan. Follow the prevailing and evolving best practice. It will keep changing as phones become more clever, as watches become more clever, as people say the Internet of Things, but actually we're just going to use more security cameras, more webcams. They're going to have more vulnerabilities on them, and so this isn't going to go away. So we just by sticking to some principles and just being aware of what you're doing and the risks. I think it is quite straightforward, but you do have to be aware and you do have to invest in it. And I think that was it for me. So, any questions on that? 25 minutes.